I'm your host, Josh Berkey,
I'm your co host, Mark Moore.
and on this episode, the special live event, we're talking about Silence of the Lambs,
Yeah.
which you've seen a lot more than I have, and we talked about this as we were gearing up to get ready to go live. So watching it this time around, this is a movie. We're just gonna jump right into it. This is a movie that I wouldn't particularly consider a horror movie. I feel like it has horror elements, but it's not an outright horror film.
It it fits more in the horror suspense than just like straight horror or slasher or anything like that. Um, because of the way it deals with the serial killers, but also dealing mainly with the investigations. So it kind of rides the line between a couple different categories, with horror being one of them.
See, to me, this feels like a psychological thriller, and I would even dare say that on so far we're still kind of young into our broadcasting careers with abyss gazing, and we've talked about some fairly niche horror so far, like Ghoulies. It definitely has to have a fan base. It's not a mainstream property by any means. Most people that do know by mainstream think about it as a Gremlins ripoff. Then you have The Wicker Man, and most
Yeah,
people today know it as the quote unquote bad Nicolas Cage movie, which
right.
will defend that. I will defend that one day on our Nicolas Cage podcast. But then you also have Sleepaway Camp, which is also a cult hit. And so I think that horror, you really have these like diehard films that like everyone's going to talk about, like Slumber Party Massacre, Sorority Row Massacre, um, Sleepaway Camp. You're going to have those types of films, and then you have films that really appeal to the general population because they're topical or they're not quite scary enough to be considered horror by horror fans like this. And I would even argue kind of like I would say Get Out has a lot more horror elements into it, and it actually is horror, but elements that are like more, I feel like almost kind of like topical types of things, and that's kind of where I would classify Silence of the Lambs.
Well, horror, and I forgot who I said this to, but horror's kind of like heavy metal. There's 9 million different genres, from hard rock to the heaviest of metal, and horror's the same way. And this skirts the line of, yeah, psychological thriller, but with some of the things that they show Hannibal Lecter doing, the backstory of Lecter that they talk about, Wild Bill and everything. Yeah, that's straight horror elements. So it may not be a straight up hardcore horror movie, but it's still part of the genre.
Oh, I'm not denying that whatsoever. I'm just kind of like talking about it like where I view it as. Like I feel like to compare like and say that they're like something like Troll and like Silence of the Lambs. Like Silence of the Lambs is it's an interesting anomaly to talk about in film history because it is a winner of I believe it says it right here. Yeah, so it won 5 Academy Awards the year that it came out, which not only includes best performance, best leading male, who was Anthony Hopkins, which ironically is only in this movie for 16 minutes, um, but also
But
best picture.
that 16 minutes though was essentially legendary.
Oh,
There's no debate on it. It's a legendary performance.
he like even before we get to Hannibal Lecter, like before Anthony Hopkins utters his very first word as the iconic villain, our first impression of him is this exchange that happens between Sterling and Lecter's psychologist, and he pulls out this picture of his jacket and he says, he faked a heart attack in 1981, and this is what he did to the nurse. A few minutes after we took off his restraints, and he offset her jaw and then ate her tongue. And
Yeah.
this is our first impression of this guy. Like, we hear about him kind of whispered about, but this is kind of like really our first introduction to him. And then finally, by the time that the camera actually gets to Lecter, I mean, it is just a it's so hard. Like every frame that Hopkins is in, he just illuminates it. Like, he just commands it, and the camera moves and bends to his will.
He did such a good job of the role that later on he played very similar roles in movies, to the point that he started turning down roles that he felt he was being typecast as that character. Um, he had one with Gosling, Ryan Gosling, I think was his name, that actor that all the women love. Uh, he's got a movie with him where Gosling's a lawyer and he's locked up for it's like beating his wife or something. And in the process of the movie, they trick him into like admitting to everything and then hit them with murder. But he plays the same style character. He's got one with Cuba Gooding Jr. where he plays the same style serial killer inmate, and it was based primarily off of how well he did as Hannibal, that even now most people that recognize him, in movies, it's Hannibal Lecter. He's he's got a huge career through all the years he's been acting, but he's Hannibal Lecter as far as anybody's concerned.
That's like almost like looking to an actor, to another actor like Samuel L. Jackson, and expecting him just to drop those famous two words that he says in nearly every movie.
he Samuel L. Jackson though has turned profanity into an art form. That's the only way to describe it. But apparently, from my understanding, Anthony Hopkins did some studying of like serial killers and psychopaths and sociopaths for the role, which is why he was able to come across so creepy as he started implementing some of those things in the acting. Like, if you really pay attention, he just stares, he never really blinks, and he stays very calm and monotone for the most part.
That I
And
feel like is. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, that's part of the things he found and picked up on from his research for the role, was that those certain actions and mannerisms, so he could portray it better as Hannibal Lecter.
That is really what I feel like helps his performance of the entire film, like, centers around him almost. Because if you talk to anybody about Silence of the Lambs, they don't remember Jodie Foster's performance. They don't remember Clarice. Like, if they remember anything about Clarice, it is that line that's not even in the movie. Hello, Clarice. But everyone's convinced that it is. And the Mandela effect has really messed with us. It's
It
not in there.
it might have been in Hannibal.
It might have been, but a lot of people, when they pull it out from I think it's the second meeting that they have. But
Huh.
I digress.
So then it would be like the same kind of thing where the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't bloody, but
Yeah,
everybody remembers it as a gore fest.
because a massacre. Yeah. But when you talk to people that have seen this movie, they always refer to Hannibal the Cannibal and like the entire thing. Like, we don't even really hear people talk about Sterling and kind of like the FBI's like police procedural themes that are woven into into the narrative, but you don't even really hear about the main villain of this in Buffalo Bill. Like, here you have, and I mean, that's another guy that really just has an absolute commanding presence. And I want to make sure that I get the actor's name right, so I'm waiting for my computer to load, and I'm just stalling until then.
Well, Well, here's something a lot of people might not be aware of. I mean, obviously horror fans might, but Anthony Hopkins was actually the second Hannibal Lecter.
Hmm.
Um, Couple years before Silence of the Lambs came out, they put out a movie. I think it was called Manhunt, and Cox was his name, Brian
Brian
Cox.
Cox.
Yeah, was the first screen portrayal of Hannibal Lecter, and Manhunt is basically Red Dragon. It came out a couple years before Silence of the Lambs, and then you had the Hannibal series, which was Mads Mikkelsen, who by all rights is a solid Hannibal, just a different Hannibal than Anthony Hopkins portrayed. And then you had the kid from Hannibal Rising that everybody just forgets because it was kind of lackluster.
So I haven't actually seen any other entries into the Hannibal series past this. And before I go on
What?
with that thought, I want to just it's it's Ted Levine is the name of James Gum, who plays Buffalo Bill, the actor
Yeah.
in this, the secondary villain that nobody ever kind of really thinks about. Yeah, so no, I've never actually seen anything past Silence of the Lambs. Like my entire entry point to
Wow.
Hannibal Lecter lives and dies with with Anthony Hopkins. And I didn't even know that this was a thing until this year when Shudder put it on their service. I don't know if Manhunt, as of this recording, is still on the service or not. But yeah. Also, I want to put this out there that it wasn't actually Hopkins that was going to be the first in this film. It was actually going to. You want to take a guess before I tell you?
Was it going to be Cox again?
No.
Huh.
It was actually one of the first people that they actually approached was Gene Hackman, Lex Luthor himself.
And that would have been a completely different role. It's like House MD. Hugh Laurie is known for being House, but they originally auditioned and wanted Jack Dempsey.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's the same kind of thing. It's night and day actors. You could never imagine pulling that role off.
But let's talk about Buffalo Bill and specifically his agenda because as I was talking about earlier in my solo stream is that the um the character of Hannibal Lecter most famously is based on Ed Gein. Ed Gein also, to bring up Leatherface again, was also the inspiration for Leatherface and Norman Bates in Psycho.
Um, yeah, the cannibalism portion of Hannibal Lecter was based on Gein, and the skinning portion of Wild Bill was based on Ed Gein as well. Norman Bates was based on Ed Gein and his obsession with his mother. And Leatherface was some of the similar aspects that were shown with Wild Bill, with the skinning and the face mask and stuff like that. Ed Gein's a very interesting character to look into, a
Oh
serial
yeah.
killer, considering that they don't know how many people he killed, because he was also a grave robber, apparently, and they don't know what body parts came from corpses or people he killed. And when he died, they said he was the model inmate and helped in the like nursing wards as an assistant and as like a janitor. And they really think it was just because of the abuse he went through, and he was kind of on the lower end of the IQ scale.
I didn't actually know all of that stuff. Like I knew about some of mild like Ed Gein information because when I got really big into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I
Yeah.
did a deep dive onto like Gein and some of like his practices and kind of like how long he quote unquote was like active. But I didn't know all of like all of that stuff. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, he's you can find a lot about him. It's not that hard actually these days. But there's a lot of aspects of a lot of serial killer movies, horror movies. They still use him and different aspects of things with him in reference to other movies, music, books, all kinds of stuff.
Well, let's jump into talk about Buffalo Bill in particular. So they, as the film kind of progresses, they also, by the way, we're going to spoil this movie if you haven't seen it.
If you
I just
haven't
want to
seen it by
just want to
now,
put
it's
that
your fault.
just want to put that out there. It's available on all media, physical, video, DVD, Blu-ray, and I don't know exactly where it's streaming off the top of my head. But yeah, so let's jump into this. So his method is that basically he keeps them in this hole in the ground for 3 days. He keeps them alive, and then once they're dead, he skins them, shoots them, and then tosses them into a river. And it's really interesting the fact that like he has like a specific mo, but like that every time that he skins them, there's like it's a different part of them that he skins.
Yeah, he's making a suit. He's making a woman's suit, essentially, is what he's doing. And he was keeping him in a well that was in his basement, I think is what it was, an abandoned well or a dried up well. And basically, I think it was Clarice explains that he was starving them. He was getting like size 14 women and starving them for a few days. So once he killed them to skin them, it was easier to skin them because the skin was loose.
Yeah, it's kind of morbid that like he knew that level of detail when it is, and it's like I, I think sometimes like when you watch movies like the way that we watch horror, like you
Yeah.
never think about it to that capacity, and then you're like, oh no, like that's actually kind of not okay in like a normal setting as an individual, like to like know that level of detail that like this is the size that I need, but this is the size that I need them to be when I kill them, and this is the method in which I'm going to get them to this end goal.
Yeah, it's you don't think about it, but it's also those little details in Silence of the Lambs that just make it an amazing movie. They had all the details for everything to a point that I can't really think of anything that would have left any open questions.
Oh no, you're 100% correct. Like they literally do everything. Like even the scene between Hannibal and I want to say it's where he's got like the half mask on and he goes to meet the victim's mother and like gives her the name of who Buffalo Bill really is, and but it's never something that's like outright spoken. Like there's always like he speaks it, excuse me, riddles, and that's one of the things that I feel like this film really hinges on the fact of like how articulate they make him and how intelligent he is, because and even when he's killing the guards in the last act of the movie right before he escapes, there's like there's a classiness to it. Like it sounds kind of
Yeah,
weird to say that, but it is.
yeah, it's almost like it's just like, "Oh, I'm going to get a glass of water. Oh, I'm gonna go cut your face off now." And it's that same kind of nonchalance, but the properness that he has about it and just coldness. And you said this was the first time you seen it?
No, no, no. This is the second time I've seen
The
it. The
second
first
time.
time I
Okay.
saw it, well, I was just kind of like, it's all
So
right.
when they get him to Memphis and he gives the name to the senator, they show shortly thereafter Clarice is messing with it because she's figured out that he likes screwing with people and giving hints or clues indirectly. And she figures out that the name he gives the senator, because I think it's the senator's daughter that was kidnapped,
Yeah, yeah, it is.
is actually, what is it, an anagram where you mix up the letters? and it's an anagram for fool's gold.
Yeah.
Did you catch that detail?
Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's the second time in the movie that he does it, because he does it originally right before he gives her the information to go and check out the storage warehouse where she
Yeah.
finds the severed head.
Yeah, he gives clues that you have to pay attention to what he says to decipher it. And Clarice picks up on that. And he's just even in Red Dragon, they and Manhunt, they have he plays those games with people. It's almost like it's a sport for him to screw with people and entertainment for him to just screw with people. And no second thought about it whatsoever because he's a psychopath. So he doesn't have to worry about it. It's not affecting him. So what does he care other than the entertainment aspect?
Yeah, and so also too, like you have a character like Clarice that is very much, and I guess this kind of comes into where the mental health aspect of our story comes, what comes into focus is that here you have someone that is a victim of tragedy and the fallout of the trauma that has come from it. So you have her mother died really early in her life, and then she talks about how her father kind of became her entire world as a result of that.
Right.
And she talks about the worst thing that's ever happened to her to Hannibal, and says, my father died. And we see kind of like how in flashbacks she basically like is traumatized for this. And so like it feels like the rest of the movie, she is constantly trying to win the approval and recognition to kind of walk out of this trauma, but also kind of start this new season in her life.
Well, I think the way it comes across to me is that she's becoming an FBI agent because she wants to be closer to who her dad was because she had so much respect for him. Her Lecter almost becomes her therapist, so to speak. Her um commanding officer, I forgot his name. Um
Gotcha.
he tells her not to give him any personal information. You don't want Lecter in your head. The psychologist that runs the place tells her essentially the same thing. And the first thing she does is start giving little personal information that builds through their conversations through the whole movie. And even at some aspects, it's almost like she looks up to him. And it's an interesting dynamic that he's a cannibal serial killer that's playing therapist and helping the police while playing games with them at the same time.
So the two names that you're looking to is Scott Glenn's portrayal of Jack Crawford, who is
Yes.
the overseeing FBI agent, and Anthony Heald, who plays Dr. Frederick Chilt, who is
Yeah.
the psychiatrist to Hannibal Lecter. And
Yeah.
um,
Runs that asylum.
yeah, specifically to your point though, like you look at something like, yes, like the advice that she is given, not to by Crawford, not to get personal, that makes sense, because in a logical sense you wouldn't want a serial killer cannibal to get in and start kind of messing with your mind and messing with your emotions. But on the flip side, you also have to create that vulnerability so that they trust you enough to let you in. And specifically, one of the things that I want to address real quick is actually from real life. So I can't talk about it yet because I'm under embargo. But Elijah Wood and Luke Kirby just did a movie together about the true story of Bill uh, Bill Hagmeyer and Ted Bundy and their relationship
Uh,
that they created in the mid to late 80s. And
yeah. Bill was it a reporter, but he was like the only guy that Ted Bundy would talk to.
No, he was actually a rookie FBI informant, or sorry, not informant, profiler
Yeah.
that turned to Bundy to learn more
Okay.
and kind of also to get him to confess. And so they actually
Right.
created a friendship out of that. And now he is respected as one of, if not the top profilers that this country and even maybe the world has ever seen.
Well, he figured out with Bundy that if he got Bundy to tell details in the third person, as if he was talking about somebody else, he could get Bundy to just rattle on and give every detail that he wanted. But if he tried to make Bundy talk about it as if he did it, he would start playing games with him and not wanting to talk and stuff.
To your point, though, yes,
Yeah,
I use that as an illustration that to draw from real life, but even to kind of step back from true crime and to step back from, horror movies, the
right.
reason that we as victims and villains and abyss gazing and that's high praise, the reason that we uh do horror movies and Nicolas Cage movies and pop culture is because we want to meet you on something that is familiar and we want to be vulnerable with you so that you can understand that you're not alone and that you have value and worth and that the depression, the addiction, the anxiety, the suicidal thoughts, whatever you're feeling that are weighing you down mentally speaking, that you're not alone and that there are help and that there are resources, but that level of vulnerability has to be done for us as the podcasters and writers first before you can take that step. And that's kind of the way that I view the Clarice Hannibal relationship, is that she's given this advice not to get close, but if she truly wants to gain the access that she desires, that level of vulnerability and trust has to be created first.
Yeah, and I think Lecter actually gained respect for her kind of quickly because she was somewhat open with him. And he seems to actually take a liking to her, like he wants to help her. So he forced her to talk about stuff she hadn't talked about. Like I think she said she'd never talked about the incidents at the ranch with the lamb and stuff like that. I think he actually took her on essentially as a patient, trying to help her once he gained respect for her after the first or second meeting.
And I mean, like Hannibal Lecter seems like, and we kind of see him throughout. Like we know his history. Like I said, like our first introduction to him is basically like him destroying a nurse. Like that's just kind of the savagery that we are introduced to him. But his relationship with Clarice throughout the film, it demonstrates that like hope and healing can come from the most unassuming, like unexpected places. And some of the things I've talked about in while we've podcasted in the past before has been finding healing in religion, comics, and even to an extent like horror movies. Like last year I shared about it on our Hellraiser episode, was that the thing that got me through a big portion of my own mental health healing last year during the pandemic was ironically just binging all of the Hellraiser movies, as good and terrible alike as they are. And you guys can hear me talk about it from last year. I'll drop in a few minutes. I'll drop the link to the episode. But I say all of that to say that healing and hope could come from sometimes truly unexpected places. So just because it seems unconventional, like don't discount it. Like when people hear that we run a podcast and a nonprofit that talks about horror movies and superheroes, they're like, but it's done with a spin to talk about mental health. People are like, how's that work? And it just goes to show you though that healing can come from the most unlikely places.
Yeah, it's looking at real life, like earlier, you have friendships that developed between people like Larry Flint, who ran Hustler, and Reverend Jerry Falwell ended up becoming friends, where they were clashing between basically how good pornography was. And there's all kinds of incidences of that. Um, it it just it's part. I think that goes to another aspect of Silence of the Lambs between the two of them. That it's if it's not on a list of top like 20 movies ever made, top 30 movies ever made, it should be. And part of that is the relationship between Lecter and Clarice, as well as Anthony Hopkins' performance, um, Wild Bill's performance, uh, all of it. Unfortunately, with Jodie Foster being as good of an actress as she was just overshadowed by Anthony Hopkins and Wild Bill. That's why when you think of the movie, you remember them. You don't remember her so much.
I mean, let's be honest. Some movies live and die by their villains. Heath Ledger's Joker is another great example. Like when you think
Yeah,
about that movie, you don't think about Christian Bale as Batman. You don't think about Harvey, what the guy who played Harvey Dent and Two
yeah.
Face. Like you don't ever think about that stuff. You don't think
Thomas
about
Jane.
it's not Thomas Jane. That much I do know. Thomas
Thomas
Jane was
Jane.
the
Harvey
Punisher.
Dent. He was Harvey Dent.
No, no, man. No, no, no. And to your point on the AFI American Film Institute's top 100 movies ever made, Silence of the Lambs sits at number 74.
I think that's low, but that's just me. Everybody has their own personal opinions on movies that are good or bad. So
And it's Aaron Eckhart that plays Two Face in The Dark Knight.
was it? I thought it was Thomas Jane.
Now, you like I said, like you don't ever, like you said, like you don't ever think about those things because like the villains are so overshadowed, and that's why I mean, granted, it took 9 years, but that's why we got Hannibal in 2001 or 2002, like a couple years after, many years after Silence of the Lambs. So that's why we got Red Dragon a few years later. That's why we got Hannibal Rising a few years later. It's the reason why we got the Hannibal TV show a few years ago. And we're just now getting around to telling Clarice's story in the Paramount Plus series.
Yeah, from my understanding, they're actually not allowed to refer to Hannibal at all.
I mean, I can. That's just lame if that's the case.
That's one of the articles I read. That was part of the deal with them being able to do Clarice was that they're basically just not going to reference Silence of the Lambs or any of the events or people from that. I could be wrong, but that was an article I read during the production of Clarice. And a lot of the comments about it was, how are you going to have Clarice without ever mentioning the events of Silence of the Lambs or anything like that? Because it's after she becomes an agent.
Yeah.
Eh, So, yeah,
Yeah, I don't understand that either.
yeah,
Well, so let's hinge on Buffalo Bill for a second. I love I'm going to preface this with a disclaimer again. Mark and myself are both two cisgendered straight guys. Um, however, I was talking to a transgender friend today, and she was talking specifically about how this film can be offensive and kind of almost like a mockery to the uh, transgender community. And I mean, again, I'm still learning and still trying to see things from different perspectives and things, and so I can see where she's coming from. But I do think it's interesting that one of the things that Hannibal specifically talks about how Buffalo Bill isn't actually a transsexual, that he just hates his own identity, and so that's the reason why he um, wants to go into be a uh, to kill and skin these women,
yeah.
which I don't know, how do you feel about kind of like that thing, because like from like what I have gotten to know about like the individuals that like I've had conversations with in the trans community, is that they just aren't satisfied or aren't comfortable, I guess is a better word, in their own skin as a um yeah, as the gender that they're born into.
So with Bill, Wild Bill, what he said was due to the abuse and rejection, he wasn't comfortable in his own skin and mistook it for being transsexual instead of being a victim. Um, is how Lecter explained it.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not really sure on that one.
Yeah, and again, like I think
It's a big topic
yes,
that
both of us are not educated on.
yeah, because neither one of us are part of that group of people. We know people, both of us know people, but we're not of that group, so we have no firsthand real knowledge or experience.
And I would like to preface this to anyone watching this, whether you're watching this live on the stream or you're watching this on YouTube afterwards, like let us know specifically like kind of your journey of how, you know, your journey of being a trans individual. Because I love hearing stories and I want to know specifically. I love hearing people's stories. So I guess like let us know about how Buffalo Bill's story is kind of presented in here, and kind of how it may or may not mirror your own story. Tweet to us or DM us on any of our social media platforms. But let's transition to some history and trivia.
Oh, history and trivia. Okay.
Also, I just want to throw this out there, since we are less than a week away from its sequel, that there is a Candyman connection here. Uh,
Do what?
there's a
Candyman connection to what?
there's a the actress that portrays Ardelia Knapp, Casey Lemons, actually also plays Bernie in the Candyman the following year.
Trying to think which character that was. You talking about the original Candyman?
Yes, she is. She is. I can't remember her character's name, but the lead actress Virginia Marston plays. It's her best friend that's doing
Virginia
the
Marsden.
yeah the
Madsen.
project with her.
Okay, okay. I know who you're talking about. I
Bernie.
don't remember in any of these movies.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because I actually like as I was watching it last night, I was like, she looks. That's not her. And sure enough, I went on IMDb and like checked it out. I was like, oh, it is her.
Which
So
character was she in Silence of the Lambs?
she's revealed like halfway through, but she's the there's a scene where the two of them are kind of sitting on like either like a counter or a washing machine
Oh, I know who you're talking about
dryer.
now.
Yeah.
With the braids.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I know who you're talking about now. Yeah.
Um.
Gotcha.
Well, all right. Um. Oh.
And, and I think last night we were watching it, and I was trying to figure out what I had seen her in too.
Yeah. Yeah. I was definitely like, because I just watched Candyman not that long ago. I did the trilogy.
There's only two movies. As
What's
far
that
as I'm
third one?
concerned,
That
there's
third one.
only two.
Oh man, that
There's
third one.
only two. The third one does not exist. Blade is only two movies. There's only three Alien movies. That's how it is.
Um, so all right, so talking about some of the behind the scenes stuff before we kind of get into some of the movies, some quick trivia for you. The real life FBI's behavioral science unit assisted in the making of the movie, as well as the movie also recouped its budget in its first week of release.
Huh. Okay.
So right out of the gate, this film
Well,
did
I
very
know
well.
fans of the book ended up enjoying the movie as well because it's based on a book series.
um, to bring Gene Hackman back into it. Actress Jodie Foster first read the Thomas Harris novel that the film is based on.
Yeah.
She tried to buy the rights herself, only to find out that Gene Hackman had actually beaten her to it. And I'm actually curious if he like is like a producer or something on this. Um, I don't. No, he's not. He has no bearings on this, so that's interesting to me.
It's yeah, that is kind of amusing that Gene Hackman owned the rights to it. So that means he got a payday off that movie, whether he was in it or not.
Yeah. I mean, unless he actually like let it go, so that's truly funny. To everyone's surprise, speaking of Harris, recluse author Thomas Harris sent all of the Oscar recipients a case of wine.
That sounds very Hollywood.
Yeah, but I mean, hey, like if you just had a big budget novel hit it big, and not only financially and critically, but also like became like the movie of the year, like wouldn't you do the same?
Oh yeah. Yeah, he probably never had to write a book again, considering that Silence of the Lambs is so legendary. Hannibal was fantastic, and Red Dragon's probably the worst of the three, and it's still an excellent movie. So yeah, he's probably set for life, and sending everybody that won award case of wine was probably just like a chip in the bucket.
And this is the last thing that I will say. We can get back to the actual movie conversation. The first moth cocoon found in one of the victims' throat was made from a combination of Tootsie Rolls and gummy bears, so it would be edible if swallowed. They did a fantastic job on that. I love that small little detail that they bring into this. That's actually a detail that I missed in my first viewing a couple years ago, was the fact
The
that that
moth.
was kind of the moth. Yeah, it was his MO. And also, too, the fact that it is native and imported from Asia and had to be rose from birth here in America.
Yeah, they're referred to as the death's head moth. Um, I forgot the actual scientific name, but everybody calls them the death's head moth, is what they're commonly known as. They actually are found in parts of Europe as
Hmm.
well, but they think they were either brought over or just kind of migrated that way from Asia. And there's two species of the death's head moth. The one in the movie is the more famous and more prevalent of the two.
And I'm almost curious too, like, but you look at something like that, and I'm almost kind of curious, like, what the what the turnaround like time from like raising them as larvae to this like final form is, because if it's a long period of time, like even not being a long period, because they comment on the fact that these bugs were loved and
Right.
cherished, is that it demonstrates also the fact that like Buffalo Bill is a patient guy. Like he's
Yeah.
patient enough to like, raise these things, and like has like long-term goals eventually
And
as well.
they talk about him having patience to do what he does. And they also refer to the whole thing with the cocoon and the moth as almost a metaphor for what he feels like he's going through in his life. So it kind of plays two roles: one, to offer up that metaphor of change that he wants to go through, and the other to show his level of patience, that he can raise all these moths and have no issues, essentially keeping them alive and breeding them and stuff.
Yeah, and to your point, like there's after the initial moth is found within the victim, there's a lot of imagery that the film really hinges on moving forward, with to signify that change. And I think one of the most famous ones is obviously probably the camera scene that would later be parodied, and I sent you this last night in Clerks 2 with Jay.
I'm not sure of the Clerks 2 scene you're talking about because I never watched it. So,
I sent it to you last night after I watched that scene.
was it after like 8:30? Because I'm old and go to bed early.
Oh, it 100% was. It was like 10:30 at night.
There's a good chance I was drooling on myself. So, yeah. The part that gets me, and it's because I didn't realize it early enough, is that the scientist that cuts open the cocoon and tells him about the death's head moth, that actor is Mad Dog from Frasier, the sportscaster, the over the top crazy sportscaster. So, yeah, it's Mad Dog from Frasier.
That's so strange.
And be, because I know him as that character, no matter what he's in from before Frasier or after, I have a hard time not seeing him as Mad Dog. So, being that I never realized it was the same actor until watching it last night, I was like, "Oh, it's oh, it's Mad Dog." So, yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. Specifically to me, but I also I love like the tidbits that you get to see. Hannibal Lecter like give the audience throughout the course of it, and the one thing that kind of is like the breakthrough of it is that he covets, like, and the first step of coveting is wanting to is seeing something that you want. And I'm curious, what is what's one thing that you covet more than anything else?
Right now, a new smoker because mine's half wore out. Uh,
That's fair. But you're
yes.
working towards it.
Yeah, I am. And I've narrowed it down to two. So, that and the Silence of the Lambs tattoo I want to get.
Get the more expensive one.
Ah, both girls are fantastic.
For me, I think for me, like it, and it's something that like I've been wanting to do for a couple years now, has been to be able to be in a position financially where I can actually work, you know, like victims is like in a position where like I can work this full
Yeah,
time.
make it your employment.
Yeah, and like I look at like, you know, as much as it is a joke, you look at like a lot of people that have started up things like OnlyFans or like TikToks or YouTubes, that they just do stupid stuff and they're able to pay off like massive amounts of student debts.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I covet that, but people would pay me to put my shirts back on.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could go that route. So,
I mean,
yeah, and they even on a lighter note, they joke about it in Letterkenny. They always make the comment, "Do something you love, and you'll never work a day in your life." So,
yeah, and
falls.
yeah, and to kind of go for like to be a cinephile about this movie for a second, as the movie progresses, the conversations that happen between the characters, and it's specifically only a couple of times in the movie, but there's conversations between Hannibal and Clarice, and then Clarice and Ardella, that just the faces and body of like the entire screen, and they're just headshots, and the conversation, it works really well, and the way that Hannibal Lecter specifically during these scenes is lit make him incredibly menacing.
Yeah, talking about the lighting, the conversations in the asylum. There's a few scenes where they do a close up on his face and directly on Jodie Foster at the same time. And I'm over here doing my hands and stuff like you guys can see that. But uh but Jodie Foster's face is all lit up and bright. And then when they show Hannibal, it's all lit from below. So it's like he's telling a campfire horror story.
I made you solo for a second because I
Yeah.
failed to realize that I can actually do that on this program. Because typically when we record, we just record over like Skype or we've used StreamYard once before, and
Yeah.
this is the first time we've ever gone live as a podcast. So um,
And
yeah, so like I'm just
the
still
kind of
trying to figure
people we
things.
are, we're both kind of animated. Like I'm kind of just because I just see my big head right here in the screen. I forget that like y'all don't see all this and pointing to stuff, but yeah, it's neat. In the same scene, they show him lit from below, like he's telling a campfire horror story, and Jodie Foster is lit up all bright and sunny and all that stuff. So talking about the shooting and cinematography, that was one of the things they did to give him a more almost menacing, creepy vibe on top of the staring and mannerisms he was already using to portray the serial killer.
I think we should just use the solo outlooks for the rest of it since we're talking about specifically headshots and just like embracing full bodies.
Yeah,
And
because
plus,
I've kind of got that creepy lighting going on, like the half light. So yeah,
well, let's jump back into some trivia real quick. And while I'm doing that, I just want to encourage anyone that is watching this right now. This is hour 9 of our 24-hour awareness-a-thon here at Victims and Villains, and we've teamed up with truly great creators like Black Women Are Scary just got done before us. Sean the Wonder is up after us. Scene Snobs have been today. The Retro Gamers, Collateral Cinema, Collateral Gaming, Nerf Herders, Assemble, Box Network, all have done tremendously awesome jobs coming together to simply raise awareness for mental health. And I just want to thank each and every one of them. I want to encourage you that if you're watching this and you are someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self harm, or depression, to please stay with us. It's the reason we make this content. And there are I don't know how you guys are watching this. I think it's to my left or to my right. Sorry. There should be not past Mark's face. There should be suicide prevention resources where you guys can get connected with counselors in your area. Call the Suicide Lifeline, and just a number of other resources that we have available for you. Um, but yeah, so Mark, you and your wife have seen this movie thousands of times. What is it about this movie that you guys always come back to?
Hannibal Lecter. I mean, it's really it's it's an awesome movie. It never really gets old, but Hannibal Lecter is just such an excellent character overall that it's hard to get past him as a character in that movie. The movie's good in itself. It's excellent in itself, but you watch it essentially for Hannibal Lecter. Secondly, you watch it for Wild Bill.
Yeah, it's weird the way that movie progresses because like one of the things that like I feel like there's a point in the film where it becomes so fixated on Hannibal that you're just like, all right, I'm here for it, I'm
Yeah.
about this, and then you get to a point where like Hannibal's no longer in the narrative. He's gone off screen and you're just focused on Buffalo Bill. Like if I had any complaints about this movie is that I honestly wish that they would have kind of handled that trade-off just a little bit better. Because there's a point where it you just kind of forget about Buffalo Bill if you've seen this movie less than a bajillion times like you. If you're in my shoes, and like there just becomes a point where you just really need to focus on other things. So
Well, I think part of that has to do with the fact of how dominating Anthony Hopkins was in that role and his presence in the movie. It's almost you don't forget him, and it overshines almost everything else in the movie. Everybody, you mentioned Silence of the Lambs, everybody knows Anthony Hopkins was Hannibal Lecter. We know the name of Wild Bill. Most people know Clarice Starling, or at least Clarice. They may or may not remember that it was Jodie Foster, unless you're one of the weirdos like me that watches it a couple times a year. Um,
I mean,
but
also Julianne Moore
everybody
played
knows.
her.
Yeah, Julianne Moore played her, didn't do nearly as good of a job, but she does play Clarice as well. So everybody knows Anthony Hopkins and Hannibal, though. And it's just that's how that movie is. So that could be what causes what you're talking about.
This is true, and like I said, like I'm not going to say that this is a bad movie, and I'm not trying to dump on this movie.
Yeah, because
It's
that would be fighting words if you did.
it's I mean, it's on the AFI list for a reason. It holds the reputation that it does. I've not heard one person talk about this film in conversation that hasn't absolutely loved this film. I truly do love this film. I think this film is filled with tremendous performances, great attention to detail from its cast and its writer. Um, so yeah, and
Yeah, the only people that I have ever met that didn't like it were people that were just into like 100% straight action movies all the time, because
and
it's not it's more of a drama than action. That's the only people I've seen that didn't like Silence of the Lambs.
and that's 100% fine.
Yeah.
Um, and so all right, so I have two disclaimers real quick for the streamer that's up after us. It's OG Victims and Villains co-host Sean the Wanderer Davis, and A, for like the first hour of his stream, you might hear his son, and B, he might be a few minutes late. So we're gonna go back to some trivia real quick.
I'm surprised my dog didn't make an appearance.
Oh, Scooby Dooby Dooby.
Every time I'm on a video chat of any kind, he sticks his giant schnoz in the middle of the camera.
Okay. All right. So here's one for you. We talk about the fact that like Anthony Hopkins absolutely dominates this movie, and one of the most iconic lines from this movie is I ate him with fava beans. Um
Yes.
this line of the fast slurring type sound that Lecter does, it's actually improvised. He did it spontaneously during filming, and everyone thought it was great. And the director was initially annoyed about it, but after a while, and denies his ear. But after a while, he has now denied his irritation with it.
Yeah, some of the best lines and scenes in movies usually end up being winged. Like Aliens, the chest burster in the original Alien, they told no one. The only people that knew was like the director, the producer, and the actor that was involved in it. The reaction you see from Sigourney Weaver and everybody was a genuine reaction to that scene. And you see things like Ryan Reynolds has fantastic, hilarious movies, and a lot of his stuff is improvised and winged. And that just, it's one of those things where when you get the right actors that know how to do it, they can pull it off, and it ends up being some of the most rememberable scenes in movies.
Yeah, true. So, all right, let me see. Let me text him real quick. Um, all right, so let me spit you out one more, maybe, or a few more. All right, okie dokies here. So
Did you did you here's one for you, don't know if you knew.
okay,
Anthony Hopkins also used to write symphonies and music. At one of his birthdays, he went to a performance where they had gotten a hold of one of his pieces of music, finished it, and performed it for him while he was at the symphony. And there's videos of it on YouTube and his reaction when they start playing a symphony that he wrote.
I didn't, but I do know that he's into metal.
Yes, he is too. Yeah, that too.
All right. So speaking of improvisations here, At obviously another iconic moment from this scene is the scene where James Gump is obviously dancing in front of the camera, and this scene was not actually included in the original draft of the screenplay, though it appears in the novel. It was added at the insistence of Ted Levine, who actually plays him, and thought that he would. The scene was essential in defining the character, which I
Was it
guess
the
like
tucking?
yeah, the tucking, like the dancing, like everything. Like I
Okay.
would argue that like this is kind of like a pivotal moment for his character, because up to this point we really don't understand his character outside of the profiling that
Mhm.
Lecter has given us. And I think his argument to put this scene in particular into the film was definitely 100% needed, because
Right.
it definitely gives us the flair for who his character is as an individual outside of the profiling.
It gives you an insight almost as to how he sees himself. Because as he's getting ready, uh, he's making his comments, and then he starts dancing around, and then the famous tuck scene where he gives almost like a crucifixion pose as he's standing there in just a robe.
Yeah. All right. So that is going to do it for us here talking about Silence of the Lambs. If you guys liked what you heard, we just dropped a brand new episode today. So wherever you guys get your podcast from, look up Victims and Villains. And we put out an episode on Sleepaway Camp today with Camp Crystal Latte. And then it ends as our special musical guest. And we're going to be talking about the stylist on our next episode. But you can hear Mark and I talk about our picks from Fantasia Fest next week, from this year's Fantasia Fest. So wherever you guys get your podcast from, make sure that you guys subscribe to Victims and Villains, or go to victimsandvillains.net. And I am actually going to throw those into the chat real quick. Sean the Wanderer Davis is up next. And have a good night, guys.
Later.